Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to be here again. We will provide another interview for our new video section from LACES, and our guest from today is Professor Doenst. He's the current chairman and director for the cardiothoracic department in Jena University Hospital. And I also would like to introduce my friend Matteo, who works in Leipzig Heart Center. First of all, Professor Doenst, thank you very much for your presence. And I would like to start asking you if you can give a brief introduction about how was your career, who were the main mentors during your pathway?
Yeah, Tulio, thank you. And hello, everyone. And hello, Matteo. Well, my career, I started medical school in Göttingen. It's in Germany, in the former East. I was actually very close to the former German border where I went to school. But anyway, medical school was in Göttingen then. And I already participated in an exchange program when I was a medical student, going to Houston for a year of research. That was already in the early 90s. And I went to Houston to work with a cardiologist, a conservative cardiologist with a basic science interest, Heinrich Tegtmeier. And so that started my research interest. I was curious at the time. I was motivated. I wanted to learn something. And then I came back, finished medical school. Since I could not go to the US directly because I wanted to emigrate, actually, I had to do my internship in Germany before I got my full license in Germany. So I went to do 1 year of or half a year of cardiac surgery in Freiburg because I thought, going to the US, becoming a cardiologist, and I would have to spend another year. I'd better, look at the surgical side of things, and started in Freiburg for half a year with Fred Beiersdorf at the time. He was a young chief. And then after half a year, I went back to Houston for 2 years of more research and had a job lined up in the US. And eventually I decided, no, it's cardiac surgery, because those 6 months had ignited my interest and enthusiasm. And then I went back to Freiburg. I did my board certification there, my training in cardiac surgery. At the end of it, I added another year of fellowship with Tyrone David in Toronto, came back to Freiburg, became staff there, Oberarzt, as we say in Germany. And then basically the contact to Fred Moore in Leipzig was made, and he recruited me to Leipzig, where I spent 4 years before I took the chair here in Jena.
Interesting. There were a lot of details I didn't know about your career. That's very cool. So, and now the second question is, most of us as academic surgeons are convinced about the importance of clinical research, RCTs and retrospective studies, observational studies. But what about basic science? Do you think we should be involved in basic science as surgeons? What's your opinion about this?
Yeah, that's a big point. I've always been considered a bit of the researcher, the stranger, so because it's not the typical career that I took, and a lot of my students that did doctoral thesis with me obviously also ended up in cardiology and not so much in surgery. The number of students that ended up in cardiology was much larger than those in surgery. But anyway, I think, over the time, a lot of things have changed, because when I started cardiac surgery, the field was in many areas free of alternatives. It was the only way to help patients at a certain point in time. There was a lot of activity that had to be developed sort of on the engineering type approach. Things have to be developed, operations have to be invented. There was no real need, because there was no competition on the one hand, and there was a lot of engineering type work that needed to be done on the other hand. And so I think that's the way cardiac surgery developed to what it is today. And then things changed, because all of a sudden we've got all these interventional alternatives. We've got medical alternatives sometimes. And all of a sudden we see ourselves as surgeons, that's my perspective, in a position where we need to sort of defend our position and our things that we do. I mean, consider we are very invasive. We are harming people. we have the potential to make a mistake and the patient is dead. So you need to have a good justification for what you do. And I think this is the time that we live in right now. We live in the time where we need to demonstrate what our surgery, what our skill, our craft can do and actually is able to achieve. And from that perspective, of course, clinical research demonstrating the effectiveness, the efficacy of treatments is very important. So, but where does that leave clinical or basic science? Okay. And I've actually, this topic has already been part of my presentation where I presented not my thesis, but my Habilitation, so the highest German degree, you give a lecture there. And we had the topic at the time was whether basic science was really needed in cardiac surgery. We even wrote a manuscript later on that we published. And the main message of that was that if a person gets active in research, and that is irrelevant whether it's basic or clinical science, if somebody gets really involved and does it at the professional level, this person becomes the better surgeon. I mean, not you better than me or Tullio, but Tullio with training better than Tullio without training. And we can see this, we can see that, and I can tell you many examples that whenever a person actually got involved in an academic type of interaction, all of a sudden the clinical performance went up and goes up. And that's in my world, a very strong argument for being involved in research in general. And whether it needs to be basic science, some have interest in it and some actually even combine it. And from my perspective, I've been involved in mitochondrial work and I enjoy it so much that I still have a basic science grant right now where we are investigating the role of alternative oxidases in the mitochondrial chain in the context of heart failure and contractile dysfunction. So, you know, not everybody has to do it, but it doesn't hurt. And if you started early, it's probably obviously best because you being involved in basic science also allows you, at least in my world, I learned how to write a review, how to write a response to reviewers, how to review a manuscript. Those are things, those are tools that you need to learn in research that are similar to opening a chest, going on pump, coming off pump. Those are things that, you start in the beginning, and the better you are at it, the faster you are, and the better you're later able to combine both worlds. Because I think in today's world, as I've addressed earlier, it is important for surgeons to combine both. You have to be knowledgeable. You have to know more about, not only about the surgery itself and how to do it, but you need to know about the alternatives, the impact, the effect of the alternatives. And that's, so you need to have, there's much more academic requirements to today's cardiac surgeon than it is 20 years ago.
Okay, that sounds really good. It's a really strong opinion. And I have another question that goes also in this thematic. In your opinion, there's a specific roadmap for residents when they should start to get involved with research, and do they really need to dedicate exclusively years just for research? What do you think? Well,
I've had many students, and many students ask me whether they have to take a year off or so for completing their thesis. And my answer has always been, it's not up to me, it's up to you. Because it's the person who actually wants to learn a lot quickly, who needs a little bit longer, who is able to juggle 2 jobs at the same time. You know, those are things that are individually different. And it is my personal conviction that if you do something, you have to do it right. So if it takes you 4 years to know how to open a chest and close it, then it is 4 years. If you can do it in 1 year, because you have the chance to be exposed more often, you have more time, you're able to invest it. You know, oftentimes I even think today that people are slowed down by the system because of all the regulations that we have. You know, the liberty that I have when I was younger, I could just be there. And with the labor laws that we have, you cannot just be there, but you can combine things because you have the same time available to you. Everybody has 24 hours a day. You need to sleep some, but then you have to work and you have to balance it with your other priorities. And it's not the system that sets the priority. It's not the employer that sets the priority. It's you, the trainee, that sets the priority for your success. And if that's sort of a philosophy that, you know, I'm very liberal in that part. And so, you know, I see my role as a mentor now more like somebody who is sort of the catalyst for that type of development. And so if you want to run fast, I'll help you to run fast. If you run slow, well, you run a little slower. You may also experience less support then because, you know, faster people need maybe more. It's very difficult, but it is... in the end, it comes back to the person who wants to do it. And in terms of managing two things at the same time, the earlier you learn something right, the better. If you learn two languages, for instance, if you grow up with two languages, you're accent-free. You know, I'm not accent-free. You are not accent-free in your second languages. But if you had grown up with that language, there's one less thing to take care of at the time. So I always thought I started very early in research because I was curious and wanted to get my thesis done. And the curiosity and the sort of enthusiasm for basic research actually only came then. I didn't have enthusiasm for basic science in the beginning. I wanted to get my thesis out of the way. And all of a sudden I was stuck and it took forever and I'm still involved. So that's the way it goes.
Okay, so our final question is, can you provide us an insight? How has research changed and influenced your life? Can you really provide to us like this statement? How important is to build a career hand in hand with research?
Well, I think for me, I've had two people who have been very influential in my research career and who have basically shaped my way of thinking and acting. And the one was a biochemist in Göttingen, where I went to med school and where I did my thesis. And that was Professor Zech. And he was a biochemist and he taught me how to think analytically and how to think critically. And that allowed me to go ahead, and that allows me still today to challenge dogmas. And then the other thing is the other person that influenced me with Heinrich Tegtmeier in Houston. He's a basic scientist, cardiologist. He trained with Hans Krebs, you know, the Krebs cycle guy. And he taught me to think mechanistically. So he said, you need to know why things are happening. And I think there's no other field than cardiac surgery that better needs those questions. You need to know why you do things in order to do a procedure safely and correctly. If you know how to do, if you know why you do the surgery, if you know why you do your movement in the surgery. I mean, all these things are very important, and they come in my personal career, in my personal life, from my research exposure. And it's not alone that, I mean, it's not for nothing that we have the motto, and you know this, Tulio, we say cardiac surgery is thinking with your hands. And that is the philosophy of that. And I think that a lot of people know what to do and how to do it, but they don't necessarily know why to do it. And if that last step comes in, you reach a different level, your quality goes up, and that is not sort of a promise or so. That's just sort of in my personal experience, what exactly happened to me. And that's why I think research and getting involved in research is very important. And the earlier, the better.
Great. I feel very identified with many of your answers and your points of view. But I do have one last question. I know we are over the time, but we are two different generations, and we were not lucky enough to be born maybe 20 years ago. 20 years earlier. Because you just mentioned it, the administrative and maybe even ethical hurdles were a little bit let's say, lower or easier some time ago. And nowadays, to perform innovative research and like groundbreaking research is not that easy. And maybe not because you don't want to do it, but because there are so many different, very difficult steps that don't allow to do it as easy as it was 20 years ago. So my question is, what would be your recommendation to be a little bit innovative and to still improve research and improve maybe even basic science in the nowadays regulations?
Well, the Americans have a very nice saying that goes, hindsight is always 2020. You know, that means that now, where if we look back, everything was so easy then. It wasn't easy then. It was difficult, and it was difficult to have a good idea. And if you now look back to the New England Journal papers or to the Lancet papers from 20 years ago, you see, oh, this was an easy idea. You know, that it was just as difficult then that it is now. And I think that you have to just work hard, think hard, and the more you get involved with a topic, the more you get competent in that topic, the more ideas you will develop, and the things that may turn out, not everybody wins the Nobel Prize. But you know, the more you get involved in things, the greater the chance that something reasonable and decent comes out. And so from that perspective, I would just say, you know, work hard, do what you can. And I also don't believe in the idea that the new generation, you belong to it, you know, that you are not good enough or whatever. Every older generation always thought that the young generation was not up to it. You know, that you can go many, many generations back. I have no problems, and I see so many young driven. I have two right here, two, you know, representatives of that young generation who are very driven and motivated. I have no worries that we will face a great future, and you will come up with great innovations. And I think the innovation will which has been shifted to interventional cardiology more in the past decade, maybe or two. I think that innovation may just as well swing back. You never know, because long-term outcomes will fail. And we need to just qualify ourselves academically, scientifically, to sort of live that life. The past 20 years, or the 20 years even before my career started, they were they had no alternatives. That was cardiac surgery was the only thing there. And when I was your age, I was the fellow in Toronto, and Tyrone David told me, this is it, you know, cardiac surgery, the good times are over, this is it. And so he promised that there is no more development. And I personally feel that I'm in a fantastic field, and I very much enjoy it. And I see a lot of potential in our field, which has not been sort of generated and developed yet. And it's up to us and up to you to actually develop it. So I'm looking very positively into our future.
Okay, that's really amazing. We end up our interview with this incredible answer, and we thank you again, Professor Doenst. Thank you very much for your presence here.
Pleasure. Thank you.